Welcome back to the Scary Collector. If you're new here, I don't do jump scares. I don't react dramatically. I don't perform. I simply collect the real ones. The stories that real people submitted, lived through, and sometimes wish they could forget. Tonight's compilation runs just over 2 hours. 7 stories. 7 people who reached out to share something they've never been able to fully explain. Turn off your lights. Get comfortable. Let's begin. Story 1. The Tenant Upstairs. This story came from a woman I'll call Mara. She was 28 years old, living alone in a 3-story apartment building in a mid-sized city in the Midwest. She'd lived there for 2 years without incident. Quiet neighbors. A building manager named Gerald who was friendly but forgettable. Nothing remarkable. Until the footsteps started. Mara worked night shifts at a hospital. She was a surgical technician, which meant she came home at odd hours. 2 a.m. 3 a.m. Sometimes 4. She'd grown used to the building being still, empty feeling. The kind of quiet that a sleeping city makes. But one night in November, she came home, rode the elevator to the 2nd floor, and as she walked down the hall toward her apartment, number 214, she heard it. Footsteps. Above her. Directly above her. Slow. Deliberate. Following her pace almost exactly. She stopped. The footsteps stopped. She told herself, it's just a neighbor. The building had a 3rd floor. People lived there. This was normal. Except, she knew the 3rd floor. She'd seen the directory by the mailboxes. Apartment 314. Directly above hers, had been vacant for 6 months. The building manager had mentioned it offhandedly once. Still trying to find the right tenant for 14. She let herself into her apartment and didn't think about it again. 2 weeks passed. Then, on a Tuesday night, or more accurately, Wednesday morning, Mara came home at 2:15 a.m. exhausted after a particularly difficult shift. She rode the elevator. She walked the hall. The footsteps again. Same rhythm. Same location. Directly above her. Starting when she started. Stopping when she stopped. This time, she didn't move for almost 30 seconds. She stood in the hallway, still, listening. The footsteps had stopped with her. Then she took 1 step forward. 1 footstep above her. She ran into her apartment. Locked the door. Sat against the wall with her phone in her hand and told herself she was being irrational. Old building, old pipes, structural settling. Sound travels strangely. She'd heard all of this before. She told herself these things until she half believed them. And then she went to bed. The next morning, she knocked on the building manager Gerald's door and asked casually whether 314 had been rented yet. He looked at her with an expression she couldn't quite read. Hesitant. Or maybe just tired. No. He said. Still vacant. Has anyone been going in and out? Maintenance. Contractors. Not that I've scheduled, he said. Why? She explained the footsteps. Twice now. Always when she came home late. Gerald nodded slowly, said he'd check the unit, and that was that. She thanked him and went to work. That night, her day off, she stayed home, sitting in her living room after midnight, watching something on her laptop, headphones off. The footsteps came again. This time she wasn't in the hallway. She was in her apartment, on her couch, and the footsteps were moving above her, slowly, in a pattern that roughly mapped to where she was sitting. She looked at the ceiling. The footsteps stopped exactly above her head. She called a friend. Her friend came over. They sat together and waited, but nothing happened. The friend slept on her couch. Mara felt embarrassed in the morning. Told herself the stress of night shifts was catching up to her. She made coffee and almost moved on. Then she noticed something that she hadn't the night before. There was a thin rectangle of discoloration on her ceiling, near the corner of the room, above the bookshelf. About the size of a paperback book. Slightly darker than the surrounding plaster. Like something had been pressed against the surface from the other side. Repeatedly. Over time. She stood on a chair and touched it. The plaster was soft. Not wet, just soft. Slightly warm. She climbed down and called the building manager immediately. This time, Gerald's expression was different when he arrived. He looked at the spot. He went upstairs. He was gone for 20 minutes. When he came back, he told her the unit was empty. Just as it always had been. But he wouldn't meet her eyes when he said it. Mara hired a private locksmith 2 days later to let her into 314. She knew this was aggressive, possibly illegal, but she'd past caring about that. The apartment was empty. Unfurnished. Dusty in the way vacant spaces get. Except for one corner. The corner directly above her bookshelf. The floor there was clean. No dust. Circular wear pattern on the old hardwood, as if someone had stood there. Repeatedly. For a long time. And pressed against the baseboard of the exterior wall. She almost missed it, was a small notebook. Cheap, spiral-bound, the kind you'd buy at a drugstore. She opened it. It was full of notes about her. Her schedule. Her shifts. The time she usually arrived home. What she wore most often. The name of the hospital she worked at. Observations, clinical in tone, unsettling in implication. The last entry was dated 3 days ago. She called the police that same hour. The investigation is still, as far as Mara knows, technically open. No one was ever charged. The person who had been accessing 314. Through means that were never fully explained, using a key that Gerald claimed not to have distributed, was never identified. Mara moved out within the month. She told me she still checks the ceiling of every room she enters now, before she does anything else. Story 2. He came every night at 3. This one was submitted by a man named Daniel. He was 34. Recently divorced. Living in a rental house in rural North Carolina. He sent this in 3 parts because, he said, it was hard to write all at once. Daniel was not a believer in anything supernatural. He said this clearly, several times. He's an engineer. He thinks in systems. He wanted that on record. The house had been on the market for almost a year before he rented it. The landlord mentioned this only briefly and attributed it to the remote location. The nearest town was 20 minutes away. No neighbors within a quarter mile. Dense tree line on all sides. Daniel liked this. He was going through a divorce. He wanted quiet. For the first 3 weeks, the house was quiet. Then, on a Thursday night, he remembers the night precisely because he'd just filed some paperwork related to the divorce settlement. He woke up at exactly 3:04 a.m. He knows the time because he checked his phone immediately. This was unusual for him. He was a heavy sleeper. He hadn't been woken by noise. He'd simply woken up. Suddenly and completely, as if someone had flipped a switch. He lay there for a moment, listening. The house was silent. He fell back asleep. The following night, Friday, he woke at 3:01 a.m. Same thing. No sound. No dream that he could remember. Just instant, complete wakefulness. He lay there for 10 minutes this time, listening. Nothing. He began tracking it in his phone's notes. Engineer's instinct. Saturday. 3:03 a.m. Sunday. 3 a.m. on the dot. By the end of the second week, it was consistent to within 3 minutes every single night. He couldn't explain it. He changed his sleep schedule, went to bed at different times, stayed up later or went to bed earlier. Didn't matter. He woke up between 3 o'clock and 3:05 a.m. every night, suddenly completely alert. He was starting to feel something he didn't want to name. On the 17th night of waking, he didn't just lie there. He got up and walked through the house. Living room, kitchen, small dining area, bathroom, spare bedroom. All empty. All dark. All still. He came back to his bedroom and stood at the window, which faced the tree line, maybe 60 yards from the house across a flat, open yard. A man was standing at the edge of the trees. Daniel stood at the window for a full 30 seconds, certain he was wrong. Certain it was a tree, a shadow, a post he'd never noticed before. The shape moved. Just slightly. A shift of weight. Daniel turned on the exterior lights. The yard flooded with light. Nothing there. He went back to bed. Didn't sleep. The next 3 nights, he stood at the window at 3 a.m. On the second night, the figure was there again. Same spot. Edge of the trees. Just standing. On the third night, it was closer. Not at the trees anymore. In the middle of the yard, maybe 30 yards away. Daniel called the sheriff's department the following morning. A deputy came out, took his statement, looked around and found nothing. No footprints, though it had rained recently. No signs of trespassing. That night, Daniel set up his phone to record the yard continuously from the window. In the morning, he reviewed the footage. At 3:02 a.m., there was something at the edge of the trees. Hard to make out, a dark shape in a dark tree line, but something. It stood there for 4 minutes. Then the footage showed it moving toward the house. At 3:06 a.m. the footage showed. Daniel had to watch this 3 times to be sure. The figure standing directly below his bedroom window. Looking up. At 3:09 a.m. it was gone. There is no footage of it leaving. It is simply there, and then it is not. Daniel sent me the footage. I've watched it twice. I'm not going to tell you what I think it shows, because I don't want to color it for you. I will say that what you see is difficult to attribute to simple causes. Daniel moved out 2 months later, before his lease was even up. He paid the penalty without argument. He told me he has not lived alone since, and does not intend to. He still wakes up at 3 a.m. sometimes. Even now. Story 3. What we found under the floorboards. This came from a couple. I'll call them Jay and Rosa, who bought a fixer-upper in upstate New York. They were in their early 30s, their first home. Excited. Full of plans. The house was built in 1931. It had passed through 6 owners since then. The most recent owner had died, natural causes, old age, and it had sat in an estate limbo for almost 3 years before coming to market. This explained the low price. Also, Jay and Rosa assumed. The first 2 months of renovation went smoothly. New roof, replaced drywall in the dining room, refinished hardwood floors on the main level. Then they started work on the basement. The basement was partially finished, a drop ceiling, carpet, old wood paneling. the kind of update that was popular in the 1970s. They were stripping it back to the original foundation, planning to build it out properly. When they pulled up the carpet and the underlayment beneath it, they found that the concrete subfloor had an irregularity. A section of it, maybe 4 feet by 3 feet, was newer than the rest. Different colored concrete. Slightly raised. A patch job, clearly, but done carefully, with some effort at concealment. Jay photographed it. They both stood over it for a while, neither wanting to say what they were thinking. They had it ground-penetrating scanned. Jay found a contractor who did this for utility detection. You could hire him to check for buried pipes or old infrastructure before digging. He ran the scanner over the basement floor. Under the patch, he said there was a void. Empty space. Box-shaped. Roughly 2 feet deep. And in it, something dense. Could be rock, he said. Could be old debris. Could be anything. Rosa didn't want to open it. Jay did. They called the police before they touched it. Jay wants to be very clear about this. He called the non-emergency line, explained what the scanner had found, and asked them to come before they did any excavation. 2 officers came. They brought a third who had some investigative experience. They broke the concrete patch themselves. Inside the void, they found a wooden box. Old, deteriorating. It crumbled when they lifted it. Inside the box were documents. Old paper, some damaged by moisture and time but largely readable. Photographs. A ledger of some kind. The documents were, as best Jay and Rosa later understood from what investigators shared with them, related to an incident that had occurred at the house in the 1950s. Something that had been, the word the investigator used was managed internally. Not reported. Not documented anywhere officially. Jay and Rosa were asked not to discuss specifics while the investigation was ongoing. What they could tell me, and what Jay did tell me, carefully, was that the photographs were of people. Multiple people. And that the ledger appeared to be a record of transactions. The investigation was eventually handed to a state agency. Jay and Rosa were told it was a historical matter and unlikely to result in prosecution due to the age of the individuals involved and the passage of time. They sold the house 6 months later. Took a loss. Rosa told Jay she felt the house was sorry. He didn't know what she meant. She said, it felt relieved when they found it. Like it had been waiting for someone to look. Jay does not endorse this interpretation. But he also said he doesn't argue with it. Story 4. The Thing That Knew My Name. This one is different. I want to be clear upfront. I am presenting this as the person experienced it. I'm not here to debate what is and isn't real. Aisha, that's what I'll call her, lived this and it changed her. Aisha was 19 when this happened. She was home for the summer after her first year of college, staying in her childhood bedroom in her family's house in Georgia. Her parents were present. Her younger brother, 14, was also home. She was a normal 19-year-old. No history of mental illness in her account. No prior paranormal experiences she considered significant. She smoked a little, drank occasionally at college, nothing remarkable. On a Thursday night in July, Aisha woke up. She doesn't know what time, she didn't look, and her bedroom door, which she always closed before sleeping, was open. Standing in the doorway was a shape. She describes it as shaped like a person but not quite right. Proportions slightly off. Neck too long. Arms slightly too low. Dark, not dressed in dark clothes, but dark as a quality, like it absorbed the whole light that should have illuminated it. She froze. lay completely still. Her heart was hammering. The shape stood in the doorway for what she estimates was 30 seconds. Then it said her name. Let me be precise about this, because Aisha was very precise with me. It said her name the way a person would who had just learned how to say it from reading it on a page. The syllables were right. The pronunciation was right. But the stress was wrong, and there was something underneath it. She says, like two voices speaking at slightly different speeds, creating a fractured echo quality. It said her name once. Then it was gone. Not gone like it walked away. Gone like, she said, the way a candle goes out. One moment there, next moment not. She turned on her lamp immediately. The hallway was empty. No sounds. She lay awake until full daylight, then got up and went downstairs. Her brother was already up, eating cereal. He looked at her and said, "Did you hear something weird last night?" She asked what he meant. He said, "Something said my name." Like it was testing it. He'd heard it from his room, which was down the hall. He thought it was her or their parents or a dream. He hadn't gotten up. Their parents reported nothing. Whatever was in that house said the names of 2 of the 4 people sleeping there. Whether it went to the other rooms first, or whether it chose, Aisha doesn't know. She's thought about this question more than she can count. Nothing like this happened again in that house. Aisha went back to college in August. She's in her early 30s now. She has not had another experience like it. But she told me something that I keep thinking about. She said, "I've tried to find an explanation for 12 years. I've gone through every rational option. Sleep paralysis. Except her brother heard it too. Family prank. Her parents would never. And her brother was genuinely shaken. Animal. She's considered this. No animal she can identify makes a human name in a human voice." She said at some point, "I stopped looking for an explanation. Not because I gave up, but because the experience was complete. It happened. It said our names. And then it left. Whatever it wasn't interested in anything else. Just knowing what we were called." She paused in her message to me, and then wrote, "I think about that sometimes. What it needed our names for." Story 5. The Smile on the Trail Camera. Short one. But it stuck with me. Marcus lives in rural Tennessee. He hunts. He runs trail cameras on his property, the kind that trigger when motion is detected and capture a photo with a timestamp. He checks them every few days, mostly looking for deer movement patterns. In October, he checked a camera positioned about 200 yards from his house, on the edge of the tree line, pointed toward a game trail that ran through his property. The camera had taken 47 photos since he'd last checked it. Most were deer. A few were raccoons and 1 turkey. Normal. Photo 43 was something else. Timestamp. 2:48 a.m. A figure, standing on the game trail. Human-shaped. Facing the camera directly. Marcus assumed trespasser. He zoomed in on his phone. The figure was wearing no shirt despite it being October, and temperatures that night had been in the low 40s. He could tell because the trail camera has enough resolution at that distance, about 15 yards, to make out skin. What made him stop was the face. The figure was smiling. Broadly. Exaggeratedly. The kind of smile that doesn't look like a real smile. The kind that looks like someone demonstrating what a smile is. Eyes open. Looking directly at the camera lens. Photo 44. The figure is gone. Photo 45. A D. Marcus posted the photo in a local hunting forum. Most people said trail camera catches weird stuff all the time, probably just someone out weird walking. One person said there's a trail camera on an adjoining property, about half a mile away. In September, it caught something similar. No shirt. Facing the camera. Smiling. Different property. Different month. Same posture. Same smile. Marcus still runs his cameras. He told me he checks photo 43 sometimes, trying to figure out what it is. He said it's the directness of it that bothers me most. Whatever it was, it knew the camera was there. It knew where to look. And it wanted to be photographed. Story 6. My mother didn't die alone. I want to take a moment before this one. This story was sent to me by a woman named Cecilia. She submitted it a few weeks after her mother passed. She made it clear she wasn't looking for sympathy. She wanted the story documented somewhere because she didn't fully understand what she'd experienced, and she needed it to exist somewhere outside her own head. I'm honoring that request. This story is told with care. Cecilia's mother, Helen, was 74 years old. She'd been declining with COPD for about 2 years. The last several months, she was on home hospice care. Cecilia and her sister took turns staying at their mother's house, rotating every few days. Cecilia was there the final week. She slept on the couch in the living room across the hall from her mother's bedroom. The hospice nurse came every morning. In the 3 days before Helen died, something changed in the house. Cecilia describes it as a presence. Not threatening. Not uncomfortable exactly. Just additional. The sense that there were more people in the house than there should be. She mentioned this to her sister on the phone. Her sister said she'd felt it during her last rotation too, but hadn't wanted to say anything. The night before Helen died, Cecilia was sitting in her mother's room. Helen was awake barely, drifting in and out. At one point, she opened her eyes and looked toward the corner of the room. Not at Cecilia, at the corner, and smiled. Not her usual smile. Something younger in it. Cecilia said. Like a young woman's smile. Helen said, "Look how many came." Cecilia looked at the corner. She didn't see anything. Helen drifted off again. She died the following afternoon, peacefully, with Cecilia beside her. Here is the part Cecilia wanted documented. When Cecilia was cleaning out her mother's room in the days after, she found a journal her mother had kept sporadically over the years. She wasn't planning to read it. She was going to put it with other things to go through later. But it fell open to a recent entry. The last one Helen had written, 2 weeks before she died. The entry said, "They've started to come. I see them in the evenings mostly. I don't recognize all of them, but some of them I do. I'm not afraid. I think they're here to help me get ready. I think this is how it works." And then, in different handwriting, shakier, which is how her mother's late writing looked, but still unmistakably hers, a single addition at the bottom of the page. "Don't be sad. Cease. I promise it's beautiful on this side." Cecilia told me she has read that line approximately 300 times since finding it. She says, "I don't know what my mother saw. I don't know what she believed. I know my mother was clear-eyed and sharp-minded until almost the very end. I know she called me Cease. No one else does. And I know the handwriting in that entry was hers." Story 7. The House at the End of Cold Creek Road. This is the last story tonight. It was submitted by a group, 3 people who asked to go by Ren, Theo and Kira. They were in their mid-20s when this happened about 4 years ago. They were, they'll admit this freely, the kind of people who went looking for things. Urban explorers. Abandoned place documenters. They had a small social media presence, nothing major. They'd been into dozens of locations, old factories, closed hospitals, decommissioned schools. They'd never had anything happen that they couldn't explain. Then they went to the house on Cold Creek Road. The house exists or existed. Wren says the county has since demolished it. It sat at the end of a dead-end road in rural Ohio, vacant for 15 or 20 years by local estimate. 3 stories. Victorian-era construction. Well-built once. Badly deteriorated. The stories about it were the usual sort. A family had lived there. Something had happened, various dramatic local legends. Wren, Theo, and Kira paid these no serious attention. Every abandoned house has stories. They arrived in the afternoon, documented the exterior, and went in through an unlocked side door as the light began to shift toward evening. The interior was what you'd expect: collapsed ceiling sections, old furniture left behind, graffiti from previous visitors, broken glass. They moved through the ground floor methodically. Documented everything. Nothing unusual. They went to the second floor. The second floor was darker. The windows were mostly covered by interior shutters that had swollen shut with moisture and time. Wren was shooting video. Theo had a flashlight. Kira had been quiet for a few minutes, which she said afterward was unusual for her. She's generally the talker of the group. She said, "Does anyone else feel that?" Neither of them answered, but both of them knew exactly what she meant. The air on the second floor was different. Not colder. People always say colder. And Kira was emphatic that this wasn't that. It was thicker. Like the air had more resistance. Like walking into a room where something has recently happened that you weren't supposed to see. Wren kept filming. At the end of the second floor hallway, there was a room with the door closed. All the other doors on that floor were open. Only this one was closed. They stood outside it for almost 2 minutes. This is visible in the footage. Wren sent me the clip. 2 minutes of 3 adults standing outside a closed door and not opening it. You can hear them breathing. Then Theo opened the door. The room was empty. Small, maybe a child's bedroom once. One window, shutter open, giving gray afternoon light. Bare floor. Bare walls. And in the center of the room, a chair. Wooden, old, straight-backed. Placed precisely in the center of the room, facing the door. As if positioned there for someone who was expected. Kira said, "We need to leave." They left. They got back to the car and drove for 10 minutes before anyone said anything. What happened next is the part they're less certain how to explain. When Wren reviewed the footage that evening, there was a section, just under 4 minutes, in the room with the chair where the audio behaved strangely. Not distorted. Not corrupted. Just, there's a sound underneath the conversation. Underneath the ambient noise of the house. That isn't the building. A low, rhythmic sound. Almost like breathing. Slow and deliberate. And at 3 minutes 44 seconds into the clip in that room, just before Kira says we need to leave, there's a voice. It says 2 words. They've played it for multiple people. Most hear the same 2 words. A few hear nothing, or something different. Wren told me what those words are. I'm not going to include them here, because they're personal. They reference something that only the 3 of them would know. Something about why they started exploring abandoned places in the first place. And that, Wren said, is what they can't let go of. A voice. In an empty house. That knew something it had no possible way of knowing. Kira doesn't explore abandoned places anymore. Theo does, occasionally, but he won't enter a room with a closed door. Ren still has the footage. He watches it sometimes. He told me. I've gone over every rational explanation. Equipment malfunction. Auditory pareidolia. Someone else in the building we didn't know about. I've considered each of them seriously. But here's the thing. And this is the part one keep coming back to. The chair was positioned to face the door. We weren't the first people to go into that house. The graffiti proved it. Others had been there. That chair was waiting for someone specific. I used to tell myself it wasn't us it was waiting for. I'm less sure of that now. Story 8. The frequency in the walls. This story was sent in by a man named Elias. He was a freelance sound engineer living in a small studio apartment in Seattle. Elias spent his days listening. It was his job to find the tiny imperfections in audio, the clicks, the hums, the things most people ignore. In the spring of 2024, he began to hear something in his own home that he couldn't filter out. It started as a low-frequency vibration, something you feel in your chest more than you hear with your ears. He assumed it was the HVAC system or a neighbor's white noise machine. But Elias was an expert. He took out his professional recording gear and mapped the sound. He found that the frequency wasn't coming from a machine. It was rhythmic, like a slow, heavy pulse, and it was localized entirely behind the wall of his bedroom closet. He reached out to the building's maintenance. A man came, listened, and said he heard nothing. He told Elias that the wall behind the closet was a structural dead space. No pipes, no wires, just empty air between units. Elias didn't believe him. One night, around 2 a.m., the pulse changed. It stopped being a vibration and became a sound. A scraping. Like someone was dragging a heavy weight across a concrete floor directly on the other side of his drywall. Elias did something he now regrets. He bought a borescope camera, a tiny lens on a long, flexible cable. He drilled a small, half-inch hole in the back of his closet and fed the camera through. The screen on his tablet flickered to life. The space behind the wall wasn't empty. It was a narrow, vertical shaft, barely 2 feet wide, extending all the way up and down the building. As he panned the camera down, he saw them. Hundreds of small, metallic objects hanging from the interior studs. Keys, watches, rings, eyeglasses, items that looked like they had been collected over decades. And then the camera moved up. There was a man standing in the shaft. He was braced against the walls with his arms and legs, hovering directly behind Elias's bed. He wasn't moving. He was staring directly into the tiny lens of the borescope. Elias didn't scream. He pulled the cable out so fast he snapped the lens. He left his apartment that night and never spent another hour there. The police found the shaft. They found the collection of items. But the man was gone. He had been using a series of hidden maintenance hatches to move between the walls of the entire complex for years. Elias told me he still wears earplugs when he sleeps. Not because he wants quiet, but because he's afraid of what he might hear if the room is too still. Story 9. The Gray Man of the Pines. This story comes from a veteran park ranger named Sarah who worked in the high country of the Sierra Nevada. Sarah is a person of logic. She has seen every type of animal, every type of weather. She is not easily spooked. But in the summer of 2019, she found something on a closed trail that she still hasn't reported to her superiors. She was doing a routine sweep of a trail that had been washed out by a rockslide. It was 3 miles from the nearest campsite, completely isolated. As she rounded a bend, she saw a man sitting on a fallen cedar tree. He was wearing a gray suit. A formal, 3-piece suit, polished shoes, a tie. He looked like he was waiting for a train in a city, not sitting in the middle of a wilderness at 7,000 feet. Sarah approached him, calling out, asking if he was lost. The man didn't look at her. He sat perfectly still, his hands folded in his lap. As she got within 20 feet, she realized something was wrong with his skin. It wasn't skin. It looked like the texture of the gray granite rocks surrounding them. Dull, porous, lifeless. She stopped walking. The air around her suddenly felt vacuum-sealed. The birds stopped. The wind died. The man turned his head toward her. His eyes were the same color as his suit, a flat, matte gray with no pupils. He didn't speak, but Sarah heard a sound in her head, like the grinding of stones together. It was a feeling of ancient, cold indifference. She backed away, never taking her eyes off him. When she was 50 yards back, she turned and ran. When she returned the next morning with a partner, the cedar tree was there, but there were no footprints in the soft dirt around it. Just a single, perfectly round stone sitting on the trunk where the man had been. Sarah kept that stone. She says it stays cold to the touch, even if you leave it in the sun for hours. She believes the mountains aren't as empty as we like to think. Story 10. The voicemail from 1994. This final edition was sent by a tech collector named Sam, who buys old electronics at estate sales. In 2025, he bought an old digital answering machine from the mid-90s, still in its original box. When he got it home and plugged it in, he found there was one saved message in the internal memory. The date stamp on the message said November 12, 1994. The voice was a woman, sounding panicked, whispering into the receiver. She was saying a string of numbers, coordinates, followed by the words, "They are in the kitchen, don't come home." Sam looked up the address of the estate sale where he bought the machine. It was an old farmhouse that had been empty for years. He did a deep dive into local archives. On November 12, 1994, a woman named Clara had disappeared from that house. Her car was found in the driveway. The front door was wide open. Dinner was still warm on the table. But Clara was never seen again. The chilling part isn't the message itself. It's what Sam found when he played the audio through a visualizer. In the background of the woman's whisper, there is a sound that shouldn't be there. It's the sound of the same answering machine, playing back the same message in a loop. It means that as she was recording the message in 1994, the message was already playing in the room with her. Sam told me he tried to delete the message, but it won't erase. He unplugged the machine, and it still plays, every night at the exact time the message was recorded. He keeps it in a lead-lined box in his garage now. He says sometimes, when he passes the garage, he can hear the whisper through the door telling him the coordinates to a place that doesn't exist on any map. 10 stories. 3 hours of things that should not be, but are. I want to thank Elias, Sarah, and Sam for adding their experiences to the collection tonight. We are living in a world that is much thinner than we realize, and sometimes, the things from the other side, they just want to be heard. Take a breath. Look around your room. Make sure your doors are locked. I'll be here collecting. I'll see you in the next one.